Good morning. I apologize for our little bit of delay, but we scheduled the hearing this morning to be basically with the BTA and Chamber of Commerce. The purpose of the hearing is really to get feedback from you. As you know, there's a bill that was proposed in the Senate. That's 9-14, and it was proposed last year. And since that time, there's been a lot of work done, and the minister has proposed an amended bill, which I hope everybody has had a copy. I do know that you've had an opportunity to meet with Mr. Hayes, and he gave a presentation to you about VAT and the benefits, the negative side, the positive side. Today, what we really want to do is we want to hear comments from the business community, whether you're for, against, what issues you have, and just time to share. So just to begin, I want to share that this morning, we're fortunate that the President of the Senate is with us. Also, Senator Ngiri Abang, Senator Inabo. And then, as we've been conducting these hearings, we've had the House has always joined us. So these are really joint hearings between the House and the Senate. So I'm going to give the floor to Chairman Isal. But before we do that, I want to also introduce from the Ministry of Finance, we have the Director of Revenue and Tax, Mr. Reinhard Silas, and his advisors, economist Mark. I won't say your last name. I was just Sturgeon. Yeah, and he's the economist that's been working with the ministry, and also Mr. John Hayes, who's works with PIFTAC, which is really a part of IMF, and really a revenue advisor. So with that, I want to give the floor to the Chairman of the House.
Good morning. We're happy. Me and House of Delegates, means I have my Vice Chairman of the committee with me, Delegate Otto, expecting some members to be coming in anytime. But we did accept the invitation of Chairman Whips to join him on this on the hearings and meetings going forward on this proposed tax reform. And we had no choice but to do it because we did take that junket trip back in September, so we owe our colleagues and IMF, and especially the people of Palau, to work on this bill with the Senate till the end. With that, thank you.
So with that, let me just kind of briefly mention the two bills that you've probably seen. There's the proposed version that's in the Senate, which was proposed a 7% VAT. Was clear that after the IMF did its reports that there was a lot of deficiencies in that proposal. So that's why you see another bill that was proposed by the Ministry of Finance, which will be our kind of our basis in revising the bill that's in front of the committee. But really, before we get into that detail, I just want to open the floor for you all to just comment, and then we're here to answer questions and really start the dialogue. So with that, do I have anybody that wants to begin? Mrs. Toribio.
Good morning, everyone. I've been waiting for this to happen for many years. Maybe since '98, I think, is when we first started talking about it. The gross revenue tax is very simple. It's very easy, but it's also very unfair. It doesn't tax people fairly. And the VAT tax will, I highly recommend it. I highly recommend it just the way that it is. My pet peeve for all of the bills that you guys introduce is you say we're going to do this, except. So I like this one. There's no exceptions, and that's how it should be. That keeps it simple if you just do it the way that it is. A couple recommendations. One, for the public education, I think it's important that you, when you're explaining the VAT system, that you also explain that if we pass this today, we don't start taxing you tomorrow. If we pass it today, it's going to take at least a year, 2 years to implement the whole thing. So the new tax rate won't become effective until 2017 or 2016 or whatever it is. So that's number one. Number two, in hearing the presentation, I understand that the people that will feel this tax the most are the lowest income. And you need to remember to add the people that will be hit the most are the people with the lowest income if they choose to buy imports. If they choose to go to Llanos or go out fishing, this tax won't affect them at all, okay? So if they have the money, excuse me if this offends anyone, if they have the money to drink and smoke and buy betel nut, well, betel nut won't be taxed, okay? But if they have the money for those things, then they should not be complaining that the can of tuna is going to cost more, because it's their choice of what they want to buy that's imported. They can get around it. And third is just the last recommendation. I talked with Mr. Hayes when and if he returns. I really would like to sit down and do a couple models of a hotel, a restaurant, a service company like a legal or accounting consultants, and show how their taxes are now under GRT and how they would probably be under the VAT system. Because I think that will speak a lot louder than anything else to people if they can see, oh, I see, this is going to be better for me, or to pinpoint more exactly who's not paying the taxes. And I'll be brave and say it, it's the lawyers. They're getting paid the most and they're paying the least taxes. So that's how the VAT system will more fairly tax everybody. And so thank you for your time.
Can I just make one or two comments? And I agree with everything you said, except the lawyers. I know nothing about that, so I wouldn't comment on that. But what I will say is overriding everything is the need to have a fair tax system. And at the moment, Palau's system isn't really fair. Tax systems should apply equally to everybody, and they should be based on people's capacity to pay. And I really don't believe that that's the way it is in Palau at the moment. So what the IMF has proposed is a balanced tax system, starting with a VAT, leading ultimately to increased business profits tax. One part of your system that I don't really like at all is that when you got the GRT, and it was some 50 years ago, you got it when you were a trust territory, it was originally designed to tax business profits. That's the main reason for a GRT. It was never designed to tax consumption. In Palau, it's evolved into a form of consumption tax and not a form of business profits tax. So the great unfairness in your system really is that employees will pay tax on their wages, but business people do not pay tax on their profits. And I don't think that's a good tax system. So ultimately that will change. We're not recommending that changes straight away, even though if you wanted to build it into the laws to put some date into the future, to me that would be a good idea because it would make sure it would happen. But that's one of the great areas of weaknesses in your law. And a VAT really is a fairer tax because it applies equally across the community at one rate. And as we know, GRT does compound. And the people that can least afford it are the people out in the outer villages and the outer islands who have the lowest income ultimately pay the highest rate of tax because there's more sales leading up to them than there are for people in Karor. Yes, on your implementation date, I've done a lot of this, so I'm comfortable that we could do it in a year. Ultimately, it's your decision, your Congress's decision as to when it would start. Anything less than a year becomes a little bit tight. Kiribati passed their laws in December and they're implementing on the 1st of April, which is a little bit tight, but they've been doing a lot of work in the lead up to December, so they still think they can get it done in April. The IMF would not recommend 6 months. We're much more comfortable with 12 months. And if you wanted to do it in 2 years, then that's really your decision, but it gives you a lot of time. I think 12 months is fine. I hope I'm back. And if I do come back, I'll spend more time in the community helping people understand how VAT works, because that's really my job, is to help the tax administration, but also to help the community. Because voluntary compliance is really what makes all tax systems work. And if the community doesn't understand, then there's no chance of voluntary compliance. So yeah, thanks. Good question. Good comments.
Just a quick question to Mrs. Toribio. You mentioned lawyers, but what's your feel about the present 4% tax, net tax on financial institution?
I'll let Sandra comment on that one. Yeah.
It's a government bank, and so I really want, if you say it should remain or if it should go up right now, and that's from the remnant of the trust territory tax.
I'd have to look at it. To me, I don't make decisions off of my emotions or off the top of my head. I need to look at the numbers. So, and while I have the microphone again, I have heard comments that people are worried about employees not being deductible anymore from the VAT. It is deductible from the GRT, but
the 100% salary of citizens of Palau.
Yeah.
That's the law now.
But the way the new VAT is proposed, I believe employees don't become a deduction. And we mentioned this at the BTA meeting, that a way to get not around that, but to offset that is to lower the employees' income tax a little bit. So go ahead with the VAT and lower the employees' income tax just a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, and just one more comment. You're right again that the VAT and GRT are two fundamentally different systems. GRT tax the gross revenue, less the deduction, as you say, for employees' taxes or employees' wages. But the credit you get under a VAT system, because VAT taxes the final consumption. So that people in this room, everybody here will pay VAT when we buy something. And the business is the collector. The business only acts as a collector. So the business can deduct the tax or has a credit for the tax that is paid on all its business acquisitions. Now, employee wages are not taxed under the VAT system. And that's why a business won't get any credit or any relief for employee wages, because there's no tax on it. The VAT system says we consumers pay tax on everything we buy, and the collector will send that tax to the tax division after deducting all the taxes that it's paid on its business expenses. So no tax on wages, no deduction for tax on wages. Sorry, no VAT on wages. And that's really why the difference is. But you're right. I agree with everything else you said.
Well, I think what you said was pretty clear. We need a tax law that's limited exemptions or no exemptions, and that's what we have in the 53-page law that the minister proposed. Some of the other things that are in that proposal are a threshold for businesses. So I think the proposal is 100,000 and below. So I'd like to hear your comments on one tax rate. I assume that if you agree, then the tax rate is at 12.5%. The business community is okay with that. What's their feeling? The biggest concern that we've had from the people is how is that going to affect consumers? The other concern has also been the threshold. Maybe at 100,000, do you feel that there's a lot of people that are going to get under and evade taxes? You know, those kinds of issues, because ultimately we want it to be fair. So I just want to hear any feedback on those issues if you have any. Or any comments from the bank?
I'm going to speak as an NDBP CEO and not as a chamber. The latest version that I've seen now is 20% on financial institutions income tax. Is that correct? I saw 10 first year, 20% second year. The latest one now is 20%, so that's the latest version. I don't know if NDBP falls under that. Okay. Just the financial institution. So now I'm going to put my hat on as the Bankers Association president. Maybe then as a chamber member.
Short wishes, please. Yeah.
With that, we'll continue our hearing after that clarification.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if I understand right, NDVP will pay VAT, consumption tax?
Just let me clarify that and make one point. Under the VAT system, there are very limited exemptions. The only exemption is for financial services. Financial services generally apply to banks, and it's in relation to interest, credit, loans, those sort of things that we expect banks to pay. That's exempt. But if a bank provides other taxable services, then it is liable. So the bank could own property, it could rent, it'll be taxable. The bank, if it gets into a leasing arrangement, and say most commonly with plant and equipment, lease back for those, that's not a normal banking transaction, so that would be taxable. So all the traditional bank services are exempt, but any related services which are outside the normal banking sphere would be taxable. So then in the majority of cases, the bank's income would not be subject to VAT, or the bank transactions would not be subject to VAT. Net income tax, maybe Mark would know the answer better than me because I'm not an expert in your law. The answer that I would give is, if you don't, you should. but I can't say for sure. Mark, does the National Bank of Palau pay net income tax?
They should.
Well, Mark's answer is they should.
I mean, actually, I don't know the answer to that question because it's the national that bank. I'm not familiar with your bank. Bank of Hawaii and Pacific would, but I don't know about the Development Bank of Palau.
I used to be a member of the board of the bank years ago, and I know, and the law has not changed. They don't pay any taxes. The only tax they pay are the Social Security, salary and wages, and of course now the health insurance contribution. But I don't think you pay any other taxes on that.
So it's something that we need to look into.
Yeah.
But we like to, you know.
I was just going to say that's something that I don't know that is necessarily addressed in this VAT law. Is if the National Bank of Palau would be, the development bank would actually be subject to different taxes than they are now, because they would probably be subject to additional VAT taxes, but not really, because again, as you were just discussing, John, a lot of their activities are not going to be subject to taxation because they're a financial institution.
So we'll let the bank continue its presentation. Thank you.
Currently, NDVP is exempt from paying taxes. I have read both bills and the Minister of Finance recommendations, and it's silent on that. So my response was to ask to make that clear on the bill going forward, to continue to make NDVP exempt from paying taxes because of the nature of our business. We take on the unbankable people of Palau and make financial services available to housing and businesses. So I've asked to make that clear on the bill.
Yeah, and there is nothing in the bill that I've read that makes you taxable. So it doesn't change the current status. Whether or not you should be, I believe you should be taxable, but that's my opinion, and it doesn't matter what my opinion is. What matters is what the law says in Palau. And if the law currently says you're exempt, that's not proposed to change under the bill that I've seen.
And maybe as a point of discussion, we could ask what the impact would be if you did have to pay the 20% income tax.
That will take away from our ability to make more loans. If we have to pay taxes on our net income, it will take away some of that funding.
So it won't raise the cost of the loans. Right now, what you're saying is that all the money that you make, net income that you make, you plow back into giving out as loans. So to restrict your ability to give out more
Right.
loans. That's what you're saying.
Right. We keep our rate low. We don't compete with the other financial institution in town. We are an animal, a different animal by ourselves. So we try to keep the rate low. And to do that, our income goes back into supporting loans and operations and administrative costs, people, rent, light bills, and that sort of thing.
Do you know what statutory provision is that allows the exemption? Is it in 40 PNCA or is it a different? Okay, because my concern would be that if it was 40, this VAT bill will repeal 40 PNCA. So
No, wait. You leave our bank alone. Please don't talk about NDBP. That's our responsibility. It's not in the study of IMF, so leave it alone for now. Yeah? Please.
Yeah, and the reasons for not taxing the bank are quite noble. That's why tax laws do have exemptions in them from time to time, and sometimes you can't avoid having exemptions. As a taxman, I don't like them, but it's a fact of life that they will exist. So those reasons that you've mentioned are probably the reasons that someone considered some time ago and said the bank won't be taxable. That's not on the table now. That's not on the table.
I just want to be on the record. Outside of that, we passed the bill in the House just the other day to make NDBP accept limited deposits, because the whole idea of NDBP was to be a Palau National Bank, development bank, developed the underdeveloped. But it's about time now that we can put our money in there in some savings that will probably help the banks increase their lending power without actually going out to borrow money. I think the history of the bank the bank now has only 2 outstanding loans. One from Social Security, one from Euro, and then one from who? Yeah. So if Palawan people start putting their money in National Development Bank instead of Bank of Hawaii and Bank of Guam and Bank Pacific, then that will help them.
You can comment on the loans that you have outstanding now. If you want.
Right. So currently, NDBP has 4 loans. The biggest one is from Republic of Palau Social Security Administration. Second one is, the balance now is just over $5 million. The second one is from the Republic of China. And that's, I believe, is about $3 million. The third one is from EIB, European Investment Bank. It's about the same as the Republic of China. And the fourth one is the $1 million from the Republic of Palau. And we're paying, the highest interest rate is just under 5% on those loans. Oh, we also have one now from USDA, but we haven't loaned that fund yet. That's for businesses that cannot get loans from any of the banks here locally. Then we will take those businesses and make that loan available for them. But we have to have documents from the commercial bank here locally that they're not willing to lend them to start their business. So we can submit that to USDA and make loans available to these high-risk businesses. And we're still working on that. So once we get that going, then we'll use that fund. So that will be the fifth one.
And how much equity do you have?
Right now, I have $16 million in equity, but that's not liquid. A lot of this is bad loans. Money is tied in bad loans that we took the land as a collateral. So that's where a big part of that equity is sitting in.
Okay. Well, the reason I asked the equity issue is that's where you're plowing the net income back into is to the equity, so that you would have more money to loan. Either you have to loan it, or you use the net income, which is basically 0% interest, so it helps you balance your portfolio and then lower the overall lending rate. So, I mean, and as policymakers, that's something we have to decide.
Right.
If we want to take your profit away, then that means you have less capacity to loan out and at a lower rate.
If I may add, Senator, I have about $5 million in liquidity, and I have about $6 million in unfunded loans. So it's upside down.
Okay. I know we have PPR, yeah? If you want to comment, I know there's BTA and also the chamber. So this is an open discussion. Any comments, anything you want to share? This is the opportunity. Any questions, clarifications? This is the opportunity.
This is a little bit of a home run for us. First of all, we'd like to thank you for actually making this hearing for us, and we'd also, as a chamber, like to thank you for making progress on it. Mrs. Toribio had mentioned it since 1998 that they'd been talking about this. I just got here in 2007, and they've been talking about it since then. The chamber was part of the tax task force back then. And I think that we were happy then to move to this value-added tax system, and we're happy now to move to the VAT system as well. The devil is always in the details. Execution is different from thought, what actually gets on paper. So I just have a couple of process comments. One, thank you for the PIFTAC rep for joining us at the BTA, our partner BTA's general membership meeting. That was very helpful. The other component is putting a different hat on, my FIC hat on. I know that the Senate hasn't, or the House has not asked the FIC for comments on the VAT. I think it should, since there's a component of it that is material to the FIC's regulatory or scope of work. So please do that. So then you can ask those questions and not feel like that somebody's wearing the wrong hat. The guy with the right hat can come and talk to you and has a position on that matter, I think. The other piece to this is what you guys were just doing an hour ago with your roadshow. I think it is really important to get people bought in and understanding and using examples that make sense to them. So again, I refer back to Mrs. Toribio's comment about 3 examples of different businesses and how it would affect them. I think one of the things that's easy for larger companies to manage through are the keeping of records. Record keeping is sort of part and parcel of larger businesses. We have armies of accountants that are different large companies. But if you're a smaller organization who would like to take advantage of the system, it's going to be a little bit tough. So understanding that, because it's change, would really be a valuable thing for the smaller companies. And then just a final comment, and this is something again was addressed at the economic symposium. A request was made that if we could please really start defining what a small and medium-sized businesses in Palau are, then we can create policy and have sort of, we're talking about the same set of companies over and over again. It becomes clear. Saying small, medium, large, and not have any context for it, I don't think is helpful. And then we can start also developing policies that help these smaller companies or entrepreneurs get going. and understanding how they can succeed here in Palau. So not exactly inside the scope of the VAT, but I know that people have been talking to you about it, and I'd like to just lodge that as a comment to try and develop a clear understanding of what a small business is, and then start supporting them with policy and National Development Bank's support as well. So thank you.
Thanks for your comments. They're all good comments. I'm quite pleased to hear that almost everybody in the business community supports this in one way or another. A couple of comments you made on specific examples regarding the process. The next step in the chain really is for the tax administration to go out and do seminars. That's part of my responsibility, is to make sure the tax administration with Mark and other people have the skills to do that. And we know there's a lot of work involved in that, a lot of work with the community. And when we look about why does it take so long to implement a tax, it's because you need to have community education. And if you don't do that well, then you're in trouble. One of the beauties of the law that we have here is it's very, very similar to the law that applies in most other Pacific countries and based on the New Zealand law. So we know it'll work. I don't expect everybody in here to know it as well as I do, and you probably never will. And I know you don't trust taxman, you don't trust Congress people, you don't trust government, but what I would say is that it will work. It's designed to eliminate most of the loopholes. If we knew there was a loophole, we'd try and fix it up. But it's a tested piece of legislation that's been used in all the Pacific countries that have VAT. So it does work. You mentioned record keeping, one of the biggest problems in the Pacific. My job's the Pacific, and I know how difficult that is for small business. And that's part of the seminar requirement for the tax division, is to help small business with their record keeping. And you mentioned small, medium enterprises again, where it fits in. I know a number of Pacific countries have done seminars and specific, not seminars, consultation on having a better system for small business, and the tax system for small business needs to be looked at as what's the best way of making it easy for small business. I know Tonga changed their laws for small business late last year, and now Samoa is going on some consultation with small business about how to improve their tax laws, because it's a different set of circumstances. Large business have professional help. They do have good records. They do have good accounting systems. We all know what small business is like. You know, they struggle. They don't have the resources to keep records, and in fact, they don't really know. So that's a worthwhile cause. Yeah, so everything you said, I agree with. Good comments.
And just one thing that I've been hearing, I just want to clarify. The GRT as it stands today, the 4%, isn't a great thing for businesses. It's actually a horrible thing, because if I don't make any money, I still pay taxes. So that's part of the reason why this new system is a positive thing for businesses. We'll actually start paying what we feel is the actual profit that that we're making, as opposed to tax on the whole revenue that was created. And as we know, just because you make revenue does not mean that you make profit. So if you could speak more sort of specifically, I've been hearing it a lot lately that businesses will start paying their fair share. Yeah, but it's a positive thing, because many businesses, I think today, large and small, feel that it's a struggle to always be paying on your gross revenue.
Okay, yeah, and I do have some comments, because small business is an area that's pretty close to my heart, because I just think the Pacific never got it right. The Pacific generally inherited systems from either Britain or the US based on simplicity, and we don't like changing, so some countries still have them. Small business is a problem, and GRT was designed to tax businesses, and it didn't take into account profit. So let me say, overriding everything is, and I really don't think I'm critical in saying it, you have a bad tax system. And you know, that's because that's what you inherited. Someone said Palau needs a simple tax system. I wish they'd said you need a good tax system, because simplicity does not equate with being a good system. So there's a lot of things you need to do. The VAT won't fix everything. It's the first step in what I would see as tax reform. Whatever happens with this current bill, there are still other things that need to happen, because you have a bad system. And we probably need to look at a whole different aspects. Small business is an area that I would actually like to focus on as a next step. Under this current recommendations, the rate of small business tax for GRT will come down because they're not in the tax system. But this was the reason Tonga reviewed their taxes for small business, and this is the reason that Samoa is presently reviewing their taxes for small business, because they want to make it fairer. Now, the people in Tonga love the new small business tax because they think it's a lot fairer. I think it may be 1% on turnover. It's quite simple, and for the really small businesses, sometimes for them, simplicity is the best way. But you're right, you need to decide what's a small business, what's a medium, where can you have some crossover between the best tax system for business is a profits-based system. But a profits-based system will not work for a business, shall we say, that has a turnover of 50,000 or less. I know, I've seen it. They don't understand, they don't comply, and the tax administration doesn't have the resources to deal with it. So it's just a mess. So yeah, lot of good points. This is the first step, and having a closer review at the best system for small business would be a good outcome, though not necessarily one that's going to be finalised with the VAT law.
Any more, Mrs. Gibbons? I see the manager of People's Bank here. I just walked in, Bank of Guam. I wonder if he has anything, Chairman, he wants to say about the proposal to decrease the tax for financial institution by 50%, or is it increase? Oh, increase to 20%. Kapsatel, Matt, he might want to say something about the net income tax for financial institution.
We reviewed it as far as with the Bank of Guam. The Bank of Guam doesn't purport to tell the government or the legislative bodies what the laws should be, how to run your own country or not. We just would like to let you know potential impacts. The Bank of Guam isn't opposed to a tax increase with the financial institutions, so particularly with Bank of Guam. We did look over the 10 to 20% increase. We do recognize that you know, as far as our stance, that it is quite a bit of an increase from 4% to 10 to 20, and I believe we have spoken to you informally, stating that well, we know that that an increase is being looked at, and that we would not stand in the way of an increase. However, we did request that it would be implemented on an incremental basis, and we were hoping that would be less than what you proposed, as far as going from 4 to 10 to 20 in a 2-year period. The reason being that it would make it easier, or it would be better for our customers in order for us to make the adjustment, so that the impact on interest rates on depository accounts and on lending would not be such a huge adjustment, and the effect would be less and spread over a period of time.
And, okay, yeah, I'm just reading the minister's letter, and his proposal is that it goes immediately to 10%, and then in a year it goes to 20%. And maybe, you know, one of the things I think that the public needs to know is, okay, so if it goes to 10%, explain how that's going to impact the consumer. If it goes to 20%, if you can give an example, that would be great on the what the cost.
At this time, I'm not.
The cost could be to the
able
consumer.
to do that.
Because I think that would help the committee in evaluating what you're saying. Because I think you know, when you say 10% on, because it's net income.
Right. I understand. I don't have that number right now. Only to say that there would be an adjustment.
So, yeah, and you can just share it to us in writing later. That's not,
Okay.
You don't have to provide it now. But
I will do.
I thought if you had something you could share.
But if you were to increase it from 4 to 8, or even or incrementally,
That would be nice.
okay.
That would be appreciated.
But if you were to increase it to 10, that will not give you reason to close the shop and go back to Guam, right?
We are committed to the region. Our bread and butter is within Micronesia. Whether if we all sink, including the Bank of Guam, if it doesn't work out here.
And I guess one point I'd like to make in relation to multinational institutions, the Bank of Guam, I would imagine is a resident or registered in the US as a US taxpayer. And the US tax laws are quite clear that they pay tax on worldwide income. So the profits from Palau will ultimately finish up in the books of the Bank of Guam in the US, and the US will charge tax. If Palau charges tax, that tax will be a credit. So the real question is, where is the tax paid, the US or Palau?
It's paid here.
It should be paid here.
Right.
It should be paid,
paid
here.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The 4% is paid here. I think the rate in the US is certainly much higher than the 4%. So there is a differential that the US would possibly collect 15, 20% taxes in addition to what's paid here. Now, I don't see that as good for Palau. I think all the taxes on profits in Palau should be paid here, and your group, the Bank of Guam, probably wouldn't be any worse off. I take your point.
Now you're saying it's offset by federal taxes. In that question, you are somewhat right. However, basically, in operations, it affects me in operations.
Well, I agree with that.
As far as the bottom line, if my bottom line goes down, if my profit goes down, the allocations of assets to the production here are adjusted accordingly.
And I agree with that. You're right.
So,
And that's why
we can't just say, hey, it's offset by the taxes in the federal government and say that the net zero effect on operations here. The effect is felt as far as the allocations of assets according to the profitability of the operation.
So when we're talking about assets, you're talking about deposits? And what you
Anything that
can
we invest in here, the deposits are here. If we can lend out the deposits here, we will lend out the deposits here.
So, and since we're on that discussion, in deposits, how much do you have in deposits locally now?
I'd have to look at my books, roughly 52 million.
52 million?
Yeah.
And how much do you lend out?
It averages around 20%.
So
Now-
10 million is lent out of the 50
right.
million.
Now you're saying you cannot, I have to say, we try to max out as much as we can lend out. However, you cannot legislate lending to customers. We cannot just give out loans to people for the sake of meeting a loan to deposit rate, because that's bad lending, and that's the quickest way for us to go out of business and leave the area. So in an attempt to increase the loan to deposit rates, we are adjusting our loan product offering to include, which we've been working with the local administration, a home loan program, which is going to be launched hopefully really soon, in the month, which will allow us to use the deposits of the people of Palau to reinvest into the community through a home loan program, which will in turn increase our loan to deposit rate.
Okay. We don't want to legislate how you loan.
Right.
I was more concerned with, you said, if your, I guess, net income after taxes goes down,
Right.
then it would affect your asset allocation. So
Right.
maybe you need to explain that, because that's what I was
Whether-
concerned about. You have 50 million now, so you don't need any other money from outside to lend
like
out.
expansions. Expansion, everyone knows my branch is one of the smallest branches here. They have long lines. Increase in my employees. I would like to put on another 4 to 5 employees with
Better
expanding the
service.
branch and
Yeah.
everything like that. Also offering different products to the area.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, and that's, we need to get an understanding of how it impacts the business that you're doing here, because we want your business to grow,
Right.
and we want to be friendly, but we also
And
want
we
to be
are.
fair.
We are.
Yeah, so,
Two questions. So just a couple of questions. First, you're a U.S. federally insured bank.
Absolutely.
So do you pay federal tax?
We pay taxes to the federal government.
Okay.
We pay taxes to,
And then you registered at the territory of Guam, which has a banking law. Do you pay tax to government of Guam?
the government of Guam and the federal taxes, the way that the federal taxes treat territorial collections of taxes, we pay to the government of Guam. It's a federal tax that is refunded back to the government of Guam, and those taxes are utilized for the
What's the
government.
tax rate on that?
I'm not a tax attorney. I haven't done the taxes.
Can we
on Guam.
get that to the
I can
committee
get it
later?
in writing.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Matt, thank you. I have a question on community reinvestment provision for FDIC insured banks. For Guam, do you apply those to Palau?
Absolutely.
Or are
We
you
do.
part
We
of
do. We do.
Palau is a part of that pool?
We do apply that to Guam. We have a Community Reinvestment Act file in which anyone can walk into the bank and look at, and which gives you what we've done for the community, special development loans or anything like that. That is present in that file. Any FDIC bank has that file within every branch.
And how is that applied to Palau specifically?
We follow the same FDIC guidelines that, portion we should be investing into community development. It goes to, although since we do not do housing loans, we do not have a file for low to moderate segments for housing loans, such as, so we don't have that portion. But as far as for donations to nonprofit organizations, for development of education, for development of business, we have those type of things that are.
So you're saying all the compliance with the Community Reinvestment Act is
We choose to.
given to Guam
we
and not so much comes to Palau?
All the information, all the resources that are here are used here. Either that, any excess depository funds are reinvested into Fed funds. Now, we do, as an institution here, as all of you know and the public knows, we are one of the biggest, not quite as big as Surangos, but we do try and do our part as far as donating to the community.
We're more interested in reinvesting into our community in form of low-cost home loans,
That's-
low-cost scholarships.
We are offering a
all the
scholarship
things-
which is open to the Palau students. Previously, we did offer a school loan, but it was relegated to U.S. citizens. However, we went back and we created a new student loan which is open to Palau students, non-U.S. citizens of Palauan descent. And that's to any four-year college or accredited college in the U.S., as well as University of Guam and possibly the community college. We're trying to see whether we can do that in order to improve education. Go ahead.
Okay, I hope to inquire more into that later, so I'll probably come and ask
yeah,
you for some
the
information.
applications have been forwarded to the community college and are available at the branch.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry we put you on the spot, but just to clarify some things, the IMF report told us that the Bank of Guam, Bank of Hawaii, Bank Pacific pay U.S. taxes, and there may be somewhere in the neighborhood of 30%, and that's on profit, right? First, you have to make profit before you pay tax.
I'd have to
Yeah.
get to
So
that information.
I just want to be clear, and this is probably something you need to communicate with your head office. If you're paying tax here, that should not affect your profit because you're paying tax on the profit. So if you're making good profit, you need to communicate to your headquarters that that's still the profit. Now, when it goes to Guam, if there's profit for the
There's
branch in Guam,
Profit after tax.
Yeah,
and
that's
profit
right.
before tax.
right?
So we have to distinguish whether we're talking about profit before taxes or profit after tax, and I'm talking about profit after tax.
Okay.
Where you're just saying profit before.
So the profit after tax, when it goes to Guam, and Guam has a profit, that profit is counted towards Guam's profit. So you will,
Towards the federal government.
Yeah.
So it is an offset.
yeah, so you are paying tax to Guam. And I know you're Bank of Guam, but we were saying, since you're in Palau, maybe that tax that you would be paying to Guam, just leave it in Palau. I think that's what we're,
I can make the suggestion or ask them to, and then I'll let you know.
yeah, okay. So if you can do some analysis.
I understand.
You
I
understand what we're
what
saying,
you're-
okay.
I understand what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Thank you. I'm sorry. You're the only bank that's here.
No, that's fine,
And
that's
we,
fine.
and I appreciate you coming and sharing with us, because I think that's what's important for the understanding of the committee is,
Absolutely. And
Because-
the community.
yeah,
as
as a
well.
community. So, thank you.
Last question, Matt. Since FIC came into existence, Financial Institution Commission, do you pay any annual fee to
We
FIC?
do pay quarterly fees, which, and
FIC.
I was going to ask you that. Can we offset that against our tax? The 10%, because that would, either that or since we'll pay the 10% and you will pay the contribution to run the FIC.
No, those are important considerations, and I hope, I know we have somebody from the Board of FIC that asked for us to make sure we get comments. And yes, we would need to see the
Right.
overall impact, because yes, you're paying fees, so.
Right, and they're considerable.
If the time comes when the net profits tax goes beyond simply banks, and I think banks, I like a fair tax system. I think the banks are treated unfairly in Palau because no one else pays a tax on their profits other than the banks. So the banks are actually doing very well. But if you come to have a net profit system that applies equally to everybody, you would need to get a new bill which maybe is half as thick as that covers the circumstances of net profit tax, which is why you can't do it at the same time as this. And the issues that you're spoken about, the considerations, what's deductible, what's not deductible, what may be income, how you get special benefits, would all be in that new bill when the time comes. And the law that you have now for net profits tax is really just one page. And it says you claim your normal deductions and you claim wages, and that's it. That is, without question, the shortest net profits tax law I've ever seen in my life, and I don't think I'll ever see one like that. It's just very brief. So the points are relevant. They'll be part of a later consideration, I think, when everything is expended. And I think the bank should be taxed in exactly the same manner as other business people.
I just want to, not in your defense, Matt, but in defense. But I basically, before you came in, Ms. Gibbon said something about financial institution. I think the proper approach for us, the committee, to look at the bank, FDIC bank and any bank in Palau to be taxed at what rate will be for us at the OEK to work with the commission. Because you actually, like you just admit, you actually follow the FIC regulation in Palau as far as banks is. So it'll be unfair for us to create FIC and then come and talk to you directly, maybe for information gathering, but we need to talk and work with the banks and with FIC in Palau to come up with a new rate or new tax form, new credits or what have you. So I just want the IMF to understand that we do have FIC here. And OEK, it's unfair for bank doing business in Palau for us to create FIC and then come and then talk to the banks directly about changing of regulations. Maybe we should work with our FIC, and that's the proper process. Personal opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Matt. Always call you Steve.
You asked earlier about the threshold and nobody's mentioned it, and I just want to confirm that I think that's probably the best approach to do this whole thing is to, as Mr. Hayes pointed out in his presentation, that 20 to 25% of the businesses are generating 80% of the revenue, and that threshold is at 100,000. One of the biggest criticisms about switching to a VAT system is the complications in the accounting and how hard it's going to be, and there's not enough accountants on the island. And I am pretty sure that all of the companies that are making more than 100,000 already have accountants. And most of them are from off island, and they already know how to do the VAT system. And I think starting with that threshold is also a very effective way of training the whole country of the effectiveness of VAT and how they can use it to their advantage. So I agree that the threshold is very good.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. I know on the IMF report, it was clear that there's basically 200 businesses that earn more than 100,000 a year in sales. 612 are below 100,000. So that's 75% of the businesses under the proposed bill would not file for VAT. That's the current proposal. Now, I guess there could be an argument that that's unfair. Why do some people get away with it? But I think maybe, John, you could explain some of the reasons, and maybe the director is here, he can explain some of the reasons why the threshold was set at 100,000.
Yeah, well, there's two reasons you have a threshold. First reason is from a tax administrative point of view. The tax division wants to focus its resources on the areas that generate the most revenue. There's no different to any other business person. And most of the revenue, I think 96% of the revenue is currently paid by 25% of the taxpayers. So they're the people that the tax division really needs to make sure they're on board. If you start putting all your efforts into the small business people, it's very time consuming. You may not improve compliance, you may not get any more money out of them, and it may mean that the larger taxpayers stop complying because they don't really understand. So it's important to have a threshold that recognises that the tax division has the resources to manage the system well. And equally on the other side, as we said, the small business people, if you start dropping the threshold down to a very low level, the small business people don't know what to do. Becomes a very big compliance burden. So that's really why we have a threshold in any country is what's the best level when you can maximise the tax collection with the resources that you have available. And the IMF did recommend 300,000, but the senators and delegates think that 100,000 is quite manageable. I agree, 100,000 is manageable. That's 200 taxpayers. So that's the primary reason. Any lower, I'm starting to get a bit nervous that the people in the tax division are spending a lot of time doing work that doesn't contribute to increasing the revenue.
Sa initial report, referring at John Hayes, to recommend a higher threshold. I think I was like you said 300,000. But again, like you said, after we reviewed the report, the review report, the historical data, GRT, associated economic data that we had taken a look at, I think the discovery was that, and you made a reference to the number, about 25% who contribute greatest to the revenue source are the ones we should be focusing on our attention on. It'll be inefficient by the concentrate global resource ay 75% contribution collectively. Directly mesra issue of record keeping for those majority under 100,000. I think we will encounter a problem with accounting, like Susan said. Direct current review tax administration to date, we're still having challenges with a lot of the smaller businesses with their record keeping. So based on gigit, and then we made that recommendation.
I have a question. Currently, legislation is asking for 12% or 10 to 12%. That's the legislated percentage. Will alcohol and tobacco also be taxed additional 12%, 10%? Or will it be exempt because currently it's quite a bit now for importing those particular items?
I think it's important to have a good understanding. VAT replaces GRT. So under the current system, tobacco is taxed at the rate per pack.
Yes.
But also there's a 4% tax added to that when they sell GRT. So VAT would be, the impact would be the same.
So it'll be additional 12% on those commodities, yes. As opposed to, well, 4%. Okay.
So the impact on the consumer, well, you have to subtract the 4% that it is now. So 12.5% would be, it would be 8.5%, yes. That would be the difference.
Okay.
I think it's important also to know that right now, GRT is 4%, right? It's on everything. After it has come in through Malacca on the truck to whatever stores. At the same time, we have a motor vehicle tax. At the same time, we have a bottled water tax. At the same time, we have cosmetic tax. We have tobacco tax, which IMF recommend that you maintain the way it is. We have cigarettes tax, which is sort of unhuman. We have beer tax, liquor, wine, carbonated soft drink, fuel. So we have all these taxes. Now, at the end of the day, IMF recommend what, Chairman?
Yeah, I think the IMF recommended to get rid of the import tax, which is 3%, the cosmetics tax, because that's really on toothpaste and deodorant, which didn't make sense, possibly to get rid of some of the other ones. We have to think about the vehicle and the fuel tax. And then, you know, just focus on the sin taxes. And let me just, you know, you asked the question on the tobacco tax. Most tobacco is not sold at the first store. For example, Shimbros brings it in. They actually pay a 4% GRT. When it goes to a mom and pop store, there is another 4% on top of that. So it's actually already 8%. So what really the committee is looking at is trying to make sure that we're as revenue neutral as possible. So the rate that we're, you know, the minister proposed 12.5%. We're not sure if that really adds up. Maybe it needs to be a little bit less. We're still, that's the, and we've asked the committee to, and we've asked the minister to look at that number again. Minister says he'd like to have a little extra cushion. We're saying we need to be as revenue neutral as possible so we minimize the impact to the community. So like what you're saying, if it's 4% plus 4%, then maybe 8% is closer. But if it's a non-food item, it's actually 4, 4, and 3, so it's 11. So the idea is ultimately try to keep it as revenue neutral as possible. That's the goal of the committee.
Yeah, I had a question about the 12% and the 7.5% and that, and really, if we're going to hold it at a revenue neutral, that means there's no gain and possibly no loss. And since we went along with the IMF recommendations, and the IMF recommendations, correct me if I'm wrong, was to increase the VAT, to increase the tax or institute the VAT tax at a 12.5%, no less than 10%. And I thought, you know, not only was it to improve the type of tax system we have, but to increase revenues so that we would be able to pay for the infrastructure improvements or whatever Palau needs, or to possibly replace the funds that are being subsidized by other governments. I know if we implement 12%, it would be a huge impact on the island. And I understand the efforts of the Senate in order to try and minimize the effects of a regressive nature of the tax. What I, coming from a business, we want to make sure that our goods are affordable to our customers, and our customers, are able to afford a certain standard of living. But with this tax and with the proposal from the IMF is proposing a 12.5% or minimum 10% because they say this is what is beneficial for the nation of Palau, the Republic of Palau, in the long run. It's going to be a hard sell. It's going to be hard to legislate at 12.5%. But the IMF, let's get this clear, the IMF that is their recommendation, 12%, as put forth by also the Ministry of Finance. So the Ministry of Finance is trying to implement what the IMF had proposed, and then the Senate is trying to use it.
Rest be assured that it's the OEK that's going to make the final decision, and that's why we're going around getting the feel.
Right, I understand that. I just want to make sure that when we institute or implement this VAT tax, that we follow the recommendation of the IMF, because it is imperative that when you implement the VAT system, that you do not have any. It's supposed to be across the board, totally across the board. That means the government will be taxed, state governments will pay a tax, and all business entities will pay a tax, whether it's public or private institution or entity. And that when we place exemptions on the tax system, the VAT tax system particularly, that actually it's to the detriment of the system. And we just want to make sure that everyone knows that there are other nations that are utilizing the VAT system within the Pacific that have adopted the VAT system, but have chosen to stray from what the IMF has proposed and have implemented exemptions. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows when we implement this VAT system that there will, in order for it to work, there cannot be any exemptions,
Yes.
pardons, tax breaks, or anything like that.
Well taken, and then perhaps the committee will seriously consider your proposal, Matt, and the. No, I mean when you spoke earlier about the rate for the financial institution, instead of from here then jump to there, be an incremental basis, and we do appreciate your comment.
Is saying with regards to the effect of it on the community, we too are approaching it at the same way, with regards to the rate that you will charge us and how it will affect the public. So we too are concerned about how the end user is impacted, the standard of living and the affordability of living.
Yeah, and I appreciate the concern that you have that we should follow the IMF as much as possible, because they are economic advisors and they have experience. I just want to share that the IMF report basically said the range is 10 to 15%. To keep it revenue neutral, they recommend 10%. So, I guess what you're, yeah. So I guess what you're saying is that you're okay with 12.5%, or are you just saying? That's what we're trying to understand here.
I'm just saying that the IMF is okay with 12.5%, and if you're following the IMF at 12.5%, then if they're your advisor, I'm not your advisor. I'm saying that if you're going to follow and you use the IMF as part of the rationale behind changing to a VAT, then perhaps you have the choice whether to use what they advise you to use. And I just want to.
The only difference between IMF and the committee members are they're not politicians. We are.
I understand that, and in the
And
end,
we are Palauans, you know.
and
so.
no, and in the end, the effect will be on Palauans. It will be the citizens of Palau. And if you implement a tax system that does not work, then does that put us in a better system, in a better position than we were with having the GRT system? Or are we in the same boat as we were in the GRT system at a revenue neutral stance, where the difference between the collections from a GRT system and the collections from a VAT system are equal? That's just something to ponder.
No, and that's, we understand that. That's why the minister, in his proposal, he wants a 12.5% because he wants to address the declining funds from the compact. And, that's something the committee has to consider. But, that's really the difficulty in this whole thing. We've always been the position is we're into tax reform. And that's the first angle. Now, if the business community comes out and says, no, you need to tax more so you have more money, more burden on the people, then that's...
No, then, I often thought that, during the legislation, you leave the amount out and just adopt, a legislation on changing the current tax structure, and then at a later date place, once the numbers are actually solidified, that you can figure out what number you shall plug into the system.
Matt, I think the chairman and the members of the committee who are here and who are not here are sort of in the same mode that we're in. We're trying to do this tax reform, not even considering the new economic assistance from the compact who is stuck in the Congress for the past 5 years or 4 years. And I think that should be our mentality, and that is our mentality. That's something that we have no control of. So we need to plan now with the tax reform for the next 15 years. And if that money comes, then it's bonus.
Just a comment before I go. I have to go. I'm glad to see that the 12.5% is not set. I'm not a tax man, but going from a 4% GRT to 12.5 VAT seems very high. If you try and sell that to the public, you may not get reelected. So you have to give it some thought. I agree with the tax reform. It's got to be at the right level. What that level is, I leave that up to the tax expert. Here's my request. I would like to see, when we go to this new tax system, to set aside a certain percentage into what I call the rainy day fund. To major catastrophe like the typhoons we've had lately, it's also a first step to Palau self-sustainability. Thank you.
I was just wondering if it's a negative or a income neutral or revenue neutral, then it's set just to pay what is existing and not to fund any further expenditures or funds. So they'd have to, by nature, increase it in order to create a rainy day fund.
Yeah, let me just explain what happened in this year's budget. Actually, this year's budget, and the reason the president was able to pass the emergency legislation and had money, this year's budget had a rainy day fund in it. And that rainy day fund was used to fund disaster Haiyan. So just as a background, the current budgeting process, that's always been the position of the committee, is to set aside a rainy day fund. So to stay revenue neutral, would still have a rainy day fund in it. That's the way it is now.
And the present budget law of Palau that became law early part of 2001, the recent budget reform act actually doesn't call it rainy day fund, it's called it reserve fund. Every budget should have a 5% reserve fund in it. But since we've been on GRT, it hasn't worked, so let's try VAT. in my work. Yeah, but we do have this year budget. But the law, the budget law, Palau, since early part of 2001, has had the clause or provision that require for OEK and the president to come up with a budget with a 5% reserve fund in it. It has never been until this last budget, so you should give a hands to the member of the 9th OEK, this president.
But I think at the same time, any increase that the OEK would see as a, if we wanted extra money, it's important for the government to justify to the public, well, what do you need the money for? And that's why it's always been the position of the committee, let's be as revenue neutral as possible, implement it. If the Minister of Finance come back and says, because the compact funds this year are going down by 2.5 million, we need to raise more money, we need 0.5% more, then that makes sense. But it needs to be justified. We shouldn't be just raising taxes because we need more money, and where's the money going? I think that's the overall concern of the community. We need to, be accountable to what we're using the money for. So, anyway, Mr. Toribio.
Thank you. I've been sitting here and listening to this public hearing. It sounds that we all like the idea of changing the tax system. And for last 16 years, we've been waiting for this. And my concern is not so much the tax system. People who are not understand the tax system in Palau think it's okay. I'm in the tour business, and I'm in the gas station business, and I'm glad you mentioned about cigarette. When I buy fuel from Mobile, I pay tax. And then I sell it to myself so I can have my boat running for the tourist. I pay tax on that. And when my customer get on the boat, they pay tax on that. Therefore, to educate the public, you need to stop talking about 4%, because that deceiving number. I pay 12 to 16% every time I run my business. At the end of the day, the customer is paying so much. So that's on my take on that. And I'm glad my wife was sitting here, and she's educating me on this subject. I would like to see more public education to the public to understand what's going on. As I look at the Senate, I'm jumping ahead of my game. The Senate and the House are not together. You guys are fighting left and right. It's a time for your advisors and IMF to educate the senators to understand the system. The business people understand the whole process. We would like to see some changes. I don't care what changes, but this is the worst system we are stuck in. And let me tell you, when I live in Oregon, beautiful state of Oregon, there's a little town called Rice Valley, which is down below, not on top, but down Rice Valley. And they have a beautiful place to buy ice cream. You can have any kinds of ice cream in the world over there. And every time we stop there, my kids say, Dad, it's time for you to find something you like. And I go and look around, and I come back and have vanilla ice cream. Because that's the only thing I know. I'm not educated to find out what is better ice cream. The senators and the people of Palau need their education. We've been stuck in this vanilla ice cream for the rest of our life. We need something else new. And most of the people in the Senate are not in the business. And I hear their comment, this is only good for big business. And when they say big business, they point their fingers. They don't say it, but I know what they're talking about. So it become a political machine that fight another machine. And this is time for our senators and our delegates to really understand the changes. It's affecting me every day, and I'm getting old. I'm retired, but I cannot retire because I want to see these changes. And please, I'm overboard on my statement, but I think you two gentlemen and third gentleman here need to sit down and really educate it. My brother, let me be honest, my brother, my cousins, and my first cousins and my second cousins in the Senate to understand this is not politics. This is a survival for Palau, or else we'll be stuck with the same old vanilla ice cream for the rest of our life. Thank you. There's one in the house, right there.
Thank you, Mr. Toribio. I think that's really the challenge that we have. It's hard to make any change, and it's important that there's a good understanding, and the committee will continue to do all it can to educate as many people, and including our colleagues, because it's ultimately we have to make a decision. Do we like the status quo, or do we want change? And that's really the question that we have to ask ourselves. So anyway, Mr. Policarp.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Just a few clarification, if possible, so that way we can understand it better. First thing, purpose of the VAT was to cover, as Matt was saying, across the board. But in Palau's situation, it's pretty much concentrated as far as revenue is concerned, only to the 20 to 25% that we're discussing. So I'm a little bit confused as far as the VAT and the purpose of the VAT, where it's supposed to go board-based, based broad, then it is concentrated. So how is that going to be transitioned to that? And I mean, just point of clarification, I guess.
Okay, so just to make it clear, you're concerned that we have a threshold at 100,000, so now 600 businesses don't have to pay VAT, and only 200 businesses have to pay. So how is it broad-based and fair?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe
In terms of, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that the businesses, the 200 businesses, are only collectors of VAT. They're not payers of VAT. The people in Palau are the payers. Every time we spend $1, we pay VAT. So those 200 businesses collect it and send it into the tax division. So they're not payers, they're merely collectors. And that's why we say it's broad, because everybody pays, everybody in this room will pay, but the top 200 will collect it, and they'll collect 96% of the VAT, and the bottom 4%, we could try and get 100% of tax collection, but really it never happens. It never happens, and you can do a lot of work to get an extra 1%, and you may not even get that. So collectors and payers, we're all the payers.
Right.
They're the collectors.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that, because now that, as my understanding is that basically the tax, you're pretty much adding taxes to the consumers. And back to what you were saying is the purpose of the VAT was to reform the tax. So it's a tax reform versus consumption tax.
It is part of tax reform, and we are adding VAT to the consumers, but you need to remember that the consumers currently pay the GRT, and we've heard, and they currently pay an import duty of 3% on most goods, but nothing on food. So the consumers at the moment will always pay at least 3% at import, and then 4% from wholesale to retail, and 4% from retail to probably the stores. So most goods have at least 7 to 11% tax in it, and some goods have more than 11. They might have 15, because depending on how many times it goes through different hands. So the VAT will replace the GRT. It won't be a new tax of 10%, if that's the number. It'll be a tax that replaces the existing GRT, which ranges from 7 to 16%. The beauty of VAT is it's one rate on all goods, and everybody knows it'll be 10%. whereas GRT, we had our tour operator say he pays 16 now. Other people might pay 12. It varies. It's hard to pick what the rate of GRT is because of the multiple sales.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe just we can explain again, right? Let's use $10, an item that's $10. Sack of rice is $10. When it comes into the port, there's zero tax. Currently, under a VAT, you would pay tax when it comes in, and then if it's sold at a store for $15. Under VAT, you would pay tax on the $5, the difference. Under GRT, you would pay tax on the $15. And every time it's sold, if now it's sold for $20, you would pay tax under a GRT system on $20, not the additional $5. So that's what happens is every time the product is sold, you're actually adding more tax. And yeah. So there's the 100,000 people that pay 100,000. I mean that earn 100,000 or more or less, they won't pay any tax. But actually, they are paying it because when it's imported, they've paid. They just won't be paying on the additional $5 they added to it. That's going to be the difference. So the government actually is not really losing that much. And actually they would be able to manage their resources better and really focus their efforts on the collections of really the big businesses. That's really the end impact. And I just to share, and maybe John can add to it, when we were in the Cook Islands, the threshold was 25,000 or 30,000 New Zealand. New Zealand was 60,000 New Zealand, which is about 50,000 US. So you can lower the threshold. However, in New Zealand and Cook Islands, they've been in the system for a long time, so they really have the resources, they have the capability to enforce it. If you look at the minister's letter, what he's proposing is to keep the GRT for the smaller businesses. That's also a debatable issue if we really need to keep the GRT or should we just eliminate it, because there is a tendency, if you have the GRT for those smaller businesses, that you get into the double taxation because they've already paid VAT on electricity they're using, they paid VAT on fuel they've used, they paid VAT on any product that they've purchased. So even though they're not paying what they've marked it up, they've already paid some. So that's why a GRT, if you leave it, may end up making it worse. So. Since Mr. Terion talked about the fuel, I'll just use the example of fuel again for people in Peleliu. Currently, we have a 5 cents liquid fuel tax. Okay, any fuel that comes in, they pay 5 cents a gallon. When it's received, there's only 2 distributors for fuel in Palau, and they don't have gas stations. They are the distributors. So they pay a 4% tax on anything that they sell. So it's 5 cents, now you add 4%. Anybody that buys gasoline anywhere in Palau is paying another 4%. Now if you're from Peleliu, you get a special. You get to pay another 4% because it has to go through a drumming facility which pays 4%, and they pay another 4%. So Peleliu, they get to pay 16%. Or 14%. And if you so happen to be a tour operator in Peleliu and you're charging that dive customer and you bought that fuel, you've added another 4%. So that consumer is actually paying 16%. So, So that's the inequity in the system that we're trying to clean up and change from vanilla to some other flavor that's maybe tastes better. But it's still the same calories.
But let me get this straight, that the GRT and the VAT, both of them are taxes that are passed on to the consumer. So when he complains that he's paying 16%, it's the consumer, ultimate consumer, that actually pays the 16%.
Right. And I think that's a very important point. It's still ice cream. It doesn't change. It's still a consumption tax, whether it's called a GRT or a VAT. It's still the same thing. Yeah.
But hopefully the Palawan people, I mean, people from Peleliu will be a smart shopper, so they're not going to buy all the time the tuna in the store, but maybe fix the fish in the fridge. And then Palau businesses will make money out of over 100,000 tourists that comes to Palau, because I think study shows that these 100,000 tourists that have been coming to Palau the past 2 or 3 years, Palau businesses or Palau government probably don't get the actual true value of tax from their spending. And so one of the reason why IMF recommend Palau to go to VAT is because of the nature of commerce of Palau, where over 50% of Palau GDP is the tourist or travel visits.
Does anybody else have any comments?
No, I just one thing that we've talked about the threshold, and one of the things that the 75% of the below 100,000 is 4%, of your total collection of revenue, and I don't know that that's been decided what to do with the people under the threshold yet, and I think that's probably important for people to know that decision has not been made yet as to what to do. Is to keep a GRT? Do you go with just a flat rate? Just a flat one per year tax for those people below, so you can collect some of the revenue and not have the collection problems, because a lot of it is the collection problems. What do you do with those small businesses, and how much time and effort do you want to, invest in collection of that income? So.
I'd just like to make one comment, and mainly for the benefit of our colleagues from PPR there. Because VAT applies to all goods and services consumed in Palau, irrespective of where they're paid for. And I know nothing about the hotels in Palau, but I do know that a number of them are internationally owned, and I do know a lot of tourists come here and pay for their packages outside Palau. Where someone pays for the package won't matter. Consumption in Palau is what's important. The full amount of the value of all the goods and services in Palau is liable for tax for all goods and services. And I've found in my travels around the world as a taxman that that's often one of the most misunderstood concepts, that if an international hotel retains 10 or 15% in their homeland, they think it's not taxable in the country where the tourists go to. But that's simply not the case. The VAT applies to everything. And that's why it's a better system.
Just one more portion of the tax I just wanted clarification on. Non-taxation or taxation of exported goods.
Yeah, currently we tax exported goods. There's a fish tax, which we probably all know about, a fish export tax, but GRT also applies to exporters. Under international norms, international trade agreements, exported goods should all be free of tax. Makes them more attractive in the land of consumption, and Palau is a consumer, so the goods you get from the US shouldn't have taxes included in them. That's the international norm. So VAT does not tax exports, and that's the structure. GRT does tax exports. The duty-free stores, the fishermen, they will pay GRT, but they won't pay VAT.
Yeah. It's a good question, and I guess one of the concerns is, well, will fish be taxed? And that's, that's a policy debate that we have to go back and forth on. There are some that believe that fish needs to be taxed even more because we're not getting our fair share of the tax on fish. Some say, well, maybe we should eliminate the tax. And under a VAT system, exports are zero tax rated. So that will be definitely a subject for debate, and we're open to comments about it. Same thing with duty-free, whether they should be exempt or not. We'll welcome comments on that. The committee, like I said, revenue neutral, so if we're still collecting taxes on those, maybe we should keep them. I don't know if they're, but it's definitely up to discussion. Because ultimately, if we eliminate those, then that means we just have to raise the rate to cover them. In the end, that's what happens, the revenue loss.
Just one other comment related to fish. Every country in the world taxes its own natural resources. Every country, without exception. Your natural resources are tourism. People come here, they'll pay tax under VAT, and that's a tax on your natural resources. But also fish are one of your natural resources, and every country in the world would make sure they got something out of fish. Not taxable under VAT, but they would have some form of royalty or some form of levy or some form of fee that makes sure that people that use your resources pay some revenue. And it's why countries like Saudi Arabia have no tax system, because their natural resources for them is oil. So they get revenue from people that want to take their oil. And it's quite normal. So don't give up your right to tax your natural resources.
For 20% for the fish, huh? Okay. If there's no further comments, I really appreciate the time that you've come in this morning, and it's almost 12 o'clock, and I know that for business, time is money, and I want to we really appreciate the time that you've spent with us this morning and sharing your input on this tax reform that's being proposed. If there's any further comment, if not, the hearing is now closed.